So, continuing our discussion here of formal game theory, we're going to talk more about limited resources and level design. This isn't just for video games, this is also for tabletop games, and even for simpler games or for new genres that you're going to, start designing. You could think of this more as like iterations of play. So, this kind of gets back to our discussion of monster design and not only the fact that they have in this competition the kind of close combat goal of what is their strategy, what is their customized strategy, and how do they achieve that? What are their resources for that? And that's how you make a dynamic fight. We also have more of the dynamic surroundings, and this is continuing the discussion of the environment as a limited resource. So the fact that you build your opponent as a designer, or build opponents, so like either enemies or the way that you're framing player versus player interaction, is that the environment is just as much of a resource, a limited resource, to everyone in the competition. So, using the Darknut example from Ocarina of Time, one of the cool things mentioned by Egoraptor, again in the Link to the Past versus Ocarina of Time video, is that when you're fighting the Darknut, there are pillars that you can break and get hearts from, but there's only a limited number. And so you have to, choose how you navigate that. And I guess part of it is also that that's how you defeat the Darknut is, how you defeat the Darknut is luring them into positions of vulnerability. So those components, I don't know if exactly the heart thing is very good. That's not something I would include, but just the idea of having resources in the fight, like positions of vulnerability that you can lure an enemy into, are very good points of design. You could think of this, in Star Wars, the classic Anakin and Obi-Wan example of the high ground. Sometimes this isn't very often relevant in video games, and I would definitely want to think of this just metaphorically, because otherwise you might be getting into problems of simulation. But creating situations where players can take the high ground in something, can have an environmental advantage that can be contested. It's not like once they get there, they have an unfair advantage. There is a vulnerability, but taking that risk gives them access to something in the fight to make it more exciting. So that's good design. That's how you want to approach level design. And also, again, coming back to different types of strategies. And I guess this is more what I meant when I was mentioning Metroid and Castlevania, is that the rooms in those video games have really interesting designs that are meant to be used in their entirety. And thinking of an environment holistically as a resource is the central point here. So as a designer, you want to make sure that each environment is equally a limited resource for everyone in the competition. And that means no matter what their strategy. So that's how you want to approach designing things like a castle that can be approached by multiple play types, whether it's, stealth or frontal assault or airdrop or whatever you want to have in your action RPG video game. Um, and I guess as we have these discussions, I do want to try and branch out more for examples uh, taken from other genres. I feel like maybe some of the things I'm talking about are a little too video game focused, but they apply universally to any genre or platform or medium that you're designing in. So also equally true for tabletop games is what I mean. So I guess yeah, for card games, I don't know. I guess this is all kind of like self-explanatory if you're designing those for card games, but and also part of it is that some of the more fun discussions and some of the things that highlight these ideas so much more visually are video games. So they just, I don't know, maybe they happen to be better examples. Um, but the next topic I want to get into here is limited resources, uh, back on the discussion of towns. So for and this also includes the discussion of cosmetic items versus mechanically relevant items. So, like I said before, I think it's better if players just have access to everything right up front that has anything to do with their own strategy. And to a large extent, I think customization of aesthetic, like especially in something like an MMO where that's more relevant, is just better design. But there are some things that you could do, especially if you can find a reason for it, to include those in town designs. But like if we take the Pokemon example, there's really no reason why you shouldn't be able to access both Bill's and Ash's PC from your player menu. There is no mechanical reason. It is just designed to waste your time to have to go back. It's it's never strategically interesting in Pokemon to isolate a player from the ability to change their strategy because every Pokemon has a level. And as you're progressing through the basic game, um, unless you just wasted your own time and grinded every Pokemon as far as you could up to your badge level, uh, you know, but even then, there's only so like a limited number of TMs and everything. So there's really no reason why the game separates you from being able to more customize your items or your Pokemon at all. Frankly, I think the way that they should have designed it is just that both items can be enclosed in Pokeballs and Pokemon are enclosed in Pokeballs, and you can transfer both of whatever those are into your Pokedex. I feel like everything should have just been in your Pokedex. And then I guess there could have been other things there. But the other example that I wanted to like use to demonstrate this is an example from Asheron's Call where no matter what the item is for, I think it's for armor and clothing items. I don't know if there were any, like there might have been some weapon items that you could do this with, but basically everything you could alter the color of by crafting, and all the crafting could just be done from your character menu, which was cool. But it required components, so you'd have to get the right dye for whatever color you wanted, and then once you used it on the item, there was actually a chance that you could fail. And the way that it failed was not only would it waste the resource that you were using, but it would also change, or it would also give the item the wrong color, which was frustrating. And both of those things I think are really, really terrible designs. Like there's no reason why you should give a player a chance to fail at making a cosmetic choice in a game. That is just maniacal design. That is terrible. That is that's antagonistic. Uh, That's like you just hate players. I don't know. Asheron's Call didn't hate players though. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is don't include that in a game. And so the things that you should have in a town, I don't really know if there's anything cosmetic, like unless there was some reason, again, unless there was some reason to separate that from a player menu. I don't know why you would put cosmetic choices in a town, like having to go places to change the color of your items or things like that. It would just be much easier if you could just do that from your player menu. But what would be cool is if you could do things that were competitions that didn't necessarily impact the competition of the game, isolated competitions. And what I mean by that is like sort of like mini games. Like it would be cool if you could go to towns and each town had a specific little racetrack. Um, one of the cool things. So this is actually an MMO example. So in Asheron's Call, one of the really cool things you could do is you could type a bunch of emote commands, and some of them actually had animations. But one of the fun ones was you could have a go-kart. I think maybe did WoW do this too? I don't know if WoW did this. But you could basically sit down in a go-kart position and the controls of your character would change to that of a go-kart. You could actually accelerate and run around as a go-kart, but there wasn't any animation of a go-kart. It was just your character like floating on the ground, like driving an invisible go-kart. It was really cool. But if you include that in an MMO, it would be really cool if in a town you could do those kinds of things just like for free. Like it wouldn't, like there wouldn't have to be experience points. There wouldn't have to be any kind of impact on their character. They wouldn't have to lose anything or pay anything. It would just be for fun, but you design it as a game. So you'd have to make sure that it was a real game. But you could have those opportunities. You could have little, mini capture the flag competitions or whatever. And maybe, kind of in that WoW fashion, instead of doing it with combat, you would have like non-combat items that you could use. You could, if it was Halloween, you could throw pumpkins, or if it was winter, if it was Christmas or whatever holidays, you could throw snowballs, things like that. Little things like that would be really cool in a town. And that's more what would make a town in an MMO interesting and unique, is having those little things to go to. And that's a much better design than making the only reason you have a town is because that's the only place you can get that resource. Now it wastes a player's time to run there, or to find the portals to get there, or they have to designate a specific, slot in their inventory for, or spell slot, so they can designate that as one of their ports, so they can port there. These are all things that just kind of limit a player's fun. There's no reason to do that. What you should give players is limited resources to compete with. That's fun. And kind of the last point I wanted to come back to here and highlight is is hone in again on what it means to have conflicting goals, conflicting goal states, conflicting victory conditions. That means that specifically they have to be in competition, not just over the outcome, but for those limited resources. So in a combat, the things that you're competing over are health points usually. But you could also, like I said earlier, maybe be competing for position within the battle space. Or like you could take the Warhammer like tabletop game example of having cover. That's another great thing. Sometimes that doesn't work as well in video games. But I mean, that doesn't mean that it can't work in video games. But I'm just saying, wherever you're designing, wherever you may find it relevant, that's something, that you can consider. So making sure that everything, well, okay, so they're not just competing over resources. You as a designer, your goal wherever you're designing, everywhere in the game needs to have a limited resource relevance to a competition everywhere. So that's your design goal. That's 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 your checklist. If something is dead weight in a game, you need to either figure out a way to make it relevant or ask yourself, why is it there? And then possibly remove it. Or maybe it could lead you to another design choice. Maybe it's trying to do something that ought to be there, but you haven't quite figured out how to do it. Figure out how to do that. So I don't want this video to get too much longer, so I'm going to stop here. And there's, again, a whole lot of other discussions that I'm still thinking of. So we'll get to those as I make them. Thanks again for listening and watching.